Hello, everyone. My name is Connie Jorsvik. I am a healthcare navigator and patient advocate with Patient Pathways. This is the first of my online workshops for the fall, and I am so delighted to have my dear friend Christa Ovenell be with us tonight. Christa is a rock star in the end of life and death world. And we have so much to talk about when the two of us get together and start talking about all the things that happen somewhere between serious illness and end of life. And so we just wanted to invite everybody to be a part of our discussion. Not a lot of this is going to involve reading slides. It's just going to be kind of a town hall kind of meeting where we're just going to talk. So without further ado, I want to invite you to say hello to Christa Ovenell, who is the founder of Death's Apprentice and now the CEO of the Death and Dying Network International.
Well, hi everybody. It is so nice to see names that I don't recognize, and hello Corrine and hello Eleanor, and a few names that I do recognize. I
Yeah.
love making this conversation bigger, and that's my goal as the founder of this little company called Death's Apprentice Education and Planning. I really want to help make people more comfortable thinking about, talking about planning and preparing for really what is life's only certainty. And I do that with a mission of trying to make it accessible and, dare I say, even a little bit fun. So I can be a little irreverent sometimes, and Connie usually has to rein me in. You can't say that, she'll say. But I just did. So there you are. Tonight we're going to be we wanted to talk about essentially the intersection between healthcare and death care. And so I thought that Connie, you could maybe sort of start with your piece. And I put together a few slides about what happens when you die. And how does that sound? Does that sound like a plan?
Wonderful, wonderful. You and I will pick up the pace and we'll, I'm sure we could be here for 2 or 3 hours.
But we won't keep you that long.
So I've been in healthcare for 45 years now. And 25 of that was in in as an RN, 15 is cardiac critical care. And one of the things that I find that is really not understood, not appreciated by the palliative care community in general, is that there are a lot of people who die in hospital unexpectedly. They'll come into hospital um, and think that they're going home within hours or days, and they just never recover and they die in hospital. And I've seen people die in all ways. I've had people die between mouthfuls of food, to get up to go pee in the middle of the night and they collapse in the bathroom and never make it back. And so one of the things we were going to talk about tonight was what happens when you go from that serious illness or maybe not so serious illness. You
Right.
think you're there just for I don't know, just a routine checkup and you never leave. So we wanted to talk about that because it happens to a lot of people. 67% of people still die in hospital. It's down a lot from a few years ago when it was consistently 87%. So I would love to know where why have we gotten that number down? Those are a few of my questions.
hmm hmm Um, well, one of the reasons is that we actually, as you know, we just don't have the space in hospitals, and our bed needs are so high that I actually think we're discharging faster and often, but not always, to places that may or may not be suitable for the attentive kind of care that is actually required. And I do think that that's certainly not the sole reason, but I do think that is one reason. I would love to say that there are also other positive reasons, but I think that that is one reason that we're seeing this decline in deaths in hospitals.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So give
Want me
us
to
your
take it
short.
away?
Yes.
I'll take it away, my friend. Let me just share my screen. I do have a few slides, and that's just so that you don't have to look at my boring face for the whole time. They're not kind of dense slides, so you don't need to be taking notes or whatnot. And I might switch back and forth, but hopefully this will also keep me from going terribly off track. So let me get this for you. You can see what happens when you die. Yes, Connie, are you seeing that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
All
Okay,
good.
good. Thanks. What happens when you die? Really, no, I mean that. Often that's quite a metaphysical question, and that is not a question that I am able to answer for you. But from a purely practical perspective, and in the minutes, hours, days, and weeks after a death occurs, I am quite a specialist. I am a licensed funeral director and embalmer. I am also an end-of-life doula and a death educator. And so I know from a practical perspective what happens when you die in a way that, frankly, a lot of folks don't. And tonight, I wanted to just say hello and give you a couple of quick acknowledgements, and then really answer the question, what happens next or what happens now? And the reason that that question is so important to me is that at the funeral home, when I would answer the phone at the funeral home, this is normally how the conversation goes. Ring, ring, hi, blank funeral home, how can I help? And then the first thing out of somebody's mouth is, my blank has died. Let's just say my mom has died. What do I do next? What do I do now? Tell me what I need to do. Those were the three most common things I heard. And that is heartbreaking to me because the simple fact is, that is a terrible time to be asking that question. What do I do now? There's no other life event that we would approach with so little preparation and so little knowledge of the practicalities of how you move through the steps and stages afterwards. So, to answer the what happens next, I'm going to go into sort of a basic overview of the most important steps, dealing with the body itself, making funeral arrangements, and then this little category I call absolutely everything else. Connie assures me that there's going to be time for questions, and if you have any clarifying questions while we go, please do ask them either in the chat or unmute. We're a relatively small group, and I'll either say, "Oh, that's coming up in a future slide," or I'll answer you. Okay.
I'm going to just jump in there and say when there is a natural break, just let us know, Krista. We're going to pause the recording so that people can come on without having to have their faces recorded.
Oh, okay. So that means um so you don't want questions, like
No,
just
I do, but let's find natural pauses. So
okay.
maybe have your thoughts, and we'll
Have your
say, are
thought.
there any questions? And we'll pause things and have a good old discussion.
Got it. I get you. Okay. So just a couple of acknowledgements. I always begin, of course, with a land acknowledgement. I am here in on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, the Musqueam peoples. I like, I think most of us in this room are an uninvited guest in this beautiful place that I call home. It is not my ancestral home, and sometimes I'm a little uncomfortable about the reality of that. But I really am profoundly glad to have been given the opportunity and invited into a journey. And I think it truly is a journey of truth and reconciliation. And for me, that journey just begins with this simple acknowledgement that this land has been inhabited long before, long before white settlers got here. Some other acknowledgements that I always want to grant in this space is that actually I'm hugely grateful to Connie for inviting me here. Connie, our friendship has blossomed over the last couple of years, but it has moved so far beyond the sort of collegial friendship that we had in the early days. And I will say yes to anything you ask. Okay. So thank you. And thank you for everything you've taught me. And thank you for your incredible generosity in this educational space. I am constantly stunned and sometimes shocked by by just how giving you are in this educational space. Another acknowledgement is that I am not, like Connie, a health professional. I'm not a doctor or a nurse, nor was I ever one. And this isn't a medical presentation. I'm also not a lawyer. And the reason that I say this is that there are sometimes questions that I'm simply not able to answer. There are a ton of legal questions that because I'm not a lawyer, I cannot. I am legally prohibited from providing you with a legal answer. And sometimes I just have to be like, oh, I'm going to put you on pause while I go ask my friend Connie. But the great news is that Connie's here today. So if you have any of those questions, she's got it. And the last acknowledgement is that this is a hard topic. We are talking about what happens when you die. And it's a tender topic, and sometimes that means that things come up. And if that is the case, I mentioned I'm a little irreverent and I can keep things relatively light, but I'm often surprised by the depth of things that my commentary will sometimes trigger for people. And you're safe here, okay? You are safe and loved, and you are not alone. So, with that, what do I do? Oh, I'm going to have to click through that because you can see that I made a mistake on that one. What do I do now? This is what I meant to put in there. The body removals, arranging disposition, and absolutely everything else. This is pretty much the order in which things need to happen when a death occurs. And while I'm going to just touch ever so briefly on deaths that occur outside of hospitals and some key differences there, for the purposes of our short time together tonight, I'm mostly going to focus on that. And we're going to start with body removals and transfers. And some of you might be looking on a very small screen. I have a big screen in front of me, and I don't know if you can see this truck over here. But once you've seen this, you will pretty much never be able to unsee it. If you are driving down the highway and you see a van that looks like this, sliding side, doors in the back, usually has a refrigeration unit on top, but not always, and blacked out windows, or as here, no windows. You know what you're looking at? You're looking at a body removal van. And that van on the highway almost certainly has one, two, maybe six bodies in it. Now that I've shown you this, you're going to be driving around, you're going to be, oh my God, there's another one. When you think of it, there's actually about 40,000-ish deaths, right, Connie, last year in BC?
Yeah,
40, 42 or 44 or something like that.
yeah.
And the majority of those, of course, because we are the majority of the population here in the lower mainland, the majority of those deaths happen here. And people need to move after a death has occurred. And so now that I've shown you this, you are never going to unsee. You're going to be like, hey, kids, look what that. No, maybe don't do that. But
I'm going to add to that visual
yes.
in that when number one, a couple of things before you get to phone somebody like Christa, is that you, for whatever reason that nature does its thing, people die in the middle of the night. And, at the lowest circadian rhythm. And so the number of people who are called in at 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to say goodbye to their loved one, is pretty astounding. And usually nobody has had that conversation at all. It seems, and one of the things that we actually put in our invite was the one time you don't, the worst time to talk about funeral arrangements is when you are
Me
dying.
too. Yeah.
And that's certainly the truth. With most of my very seriously ill clients, I will pull the family aside and say, have you got a funeral home yet? No, we thought it was too soon to have that conversation. I encourage you to get the funeral home long, long, long before serious illness hits, so that question doesn't come up. So my little white van story is that in hospital, if you see a stretcher with a sheet over top of it, but no body on it. And it looks like that sheet is descending, it's a really long sheet. It's because there's a cavity inside the stretcher where the body is put and for transport to the morgue. So now you'll see those, if you ever go into hospital, you'll see those stretchers going down the hall and you'll go, oh, okay.
I know what's happening. Yeah. And you know what? It's actually a testament to our death denying society that even in a hospital where still the majority of people die in our province and in our country, even there, we can't move dead bodies in a place where they die from one place to another and have them be seen. They are still hidden. And this really does speak to the fact that we are not, as a society, very comfortable with this concept at all. Different topic, but gosh, you can see how quickly I'll get on it, right? So, here's the number one thing. If anybody's taking notes tonight, about removals, this is what we call transfers or removals. Okay. And I want to explain to you, where the body goes and how this all takes place. But the very first thing that I really want you to understand is that you can take time and you can be present. This doesn't matter if you are in a hospital, if you are at home, if you are in a long-term care place, a long-term care home, or a hospice. Those are the four most likely places that a death is going to occur. The fifth is truly in community, so a death occurring in Safeway or on the sidewalk or something like that. And when that happens, the rules are a little different. You actually are very unlikely to be able to be present. Almost certainly you're not able to be present. And you're not on your own timeline, you're on a coroner's timeline at that point. But for these other four, in a hospital, home, long-term care, or hospice, you can take your time and you can be present. And if the death occurred when you were not there, you can ask for everything to hold until you get there within a certain amount of sort of reasonableness. Again, beds are needed and things like that. But truly, when a death occurs in a hospital, it's probably about 2 hours for the charge nurse to get all of the paperwork together that will then release the body from that bed into their slot in the morgue. So you've kind of got this automatic couple of hours before they're even moved from bed, hospital bed, to morgue. In hospitals, we always go. Now, this is true in British Columbia. It's not necessarily true in the entire world, but in hospitals now, even regional hospitals, we go from hospital bed to morgue, and then we are transferred out into a morgue in a funeral home or to whatever arrangement is going to be made, which is later on in our slides. That once that body has moved into the morgue, though, the hospital morgue, you no longer have an opportunity to see it until later and until there's some mediation with a funeral director or a funeral home. So if you want that opportunity, whether you were present or not, take your time, ask to be present, and wait. From the time the funeral home itself is called, that's likely going to be between, at the minimum, in Vancouver and the immediate surrounding regions and any larger city, an hour and a half. From the time that call is made to the time that they can come and pick up. All right. And in a hospital setting, the body has to be released from the morgue. So that may not occur until the next day or until some other. So you have actually quite a bit of time in a hospital to just take a minute and know that your person is safe and secure and no one can sort of mess with them, if you will. In a home, if the death occurred in a home, if it occurred in a long-term care, or if it occurred in a hospice, there is no morgue. And so at that point, the clock is ticking a little bit. And if it's your home, you have more opportunity to take kind of a lengthier amount of time. But it typically, my experience is between like 4 and 6 hours on the outside of what they want the body to how long they want the body to remain and will allow for people to come in. That may, if that doesn't make sense, or if you're unclear, raise hands or pop it in the chat or whatnot, but hopefully I've made that relatively clear. All
So
right.
I will say a couple things from a nurse who, I had a lot of people who died. Most of the time, nursing staff are going to be very accommodating. If somebody died in a four-bedroom, they're going to work really hard to move the body to someplace that is more private, that family can come. Nurses are great at serving coffee or tea and biscuits, and very understanding. Um, in hospices, at home, generally, if somebody dies in the middle of the night, you've got until the morning. But I do want to bring up are you going to talk about the expected death in the home form, Krista?
No.
Okay, so I just want to say that some people are working hard at having death viewings at home and having ceremony at home. There are some communities that are much greener about that, and it's really important that if that's something that you want to do, you need to have a form called the expected death in the home form done long before the person dies. It means that the ambulance isn't called, the paramedics aren't called,
These are not
the
called.
yeah, the police aren't called, the coroner isn't called, and your funeral people will help you ahead of time with all the things that you will need to keep your person at home for in generally up to 72 hours. It can be longer. So you
Mhm.
just have to plan ahead if you know that that's going to happen.
And even if you want to have somebody stay for a few hours, if you do not have an expected death in the home form, everything shifts. And while it may not end up being a coroner case, a coroner will have to be called for a home death if it was not expected. And that can really change the vibe,
Mhm.
frankly, for what you might be going for, right? So that is a really, really important piece. And that is actually a little bit about what the answer to the question, what is a transfer? The transfer or body removal is literally just the dispatching of the folks who are going to come and pick up your person. This is usually a funeral provider. It is often a funeral director themselves, but often this work is subcontracted. And it surprises people sometimes to know, as I pointed out, that it's a van, not a hearse that picks up in this at this stage of the game. All right. Um, this is how much does it cost is an important thing for you to understand, because this is essentially inherently the beginning of a contract between you and the funeral home that you call to pick up this person. So this is another reason that I don't want you to be talking to a funeral director for the first time when you need to speak to a funeral director. Because if you have gone into any form of panic, and I got to tell you, I lost my dad in March, and we had a week-long decline. He was already in his, 90 years old. He had dementia for the last many years of his life. This was not a surprise. And yet and I am a death educator and a funeral director. And the moment that I got the call, because I wasn't there, um, I had this instant, very surprising for me, panic reaction where my first instinct was to move very, very quickly. And something that I counsel people all the time, and what was the first thing that I said to you? What was the first thing that I asked you to take notes on was slow down and take your time. And here's a girl who can't take her own medicine, right? So no matter what is happening, sometimes our little lizard brains just kick in and kick over. And and if you have all of a sudden you call the first thing that comes up. It used to be looked up in the yellow pages, now it's looking up on Google, and the first one at the top of the list, and you're like, oh, hi, can you come and get my person? Well, you've entered into a contract, and at the very least, you are going to pay for them to pick up that person in their specialized van. That costs a fair bit of money, and they're going to send a couple people too. So you're paying for the people and the equipment, and then you're paying for the sheltering space. So at the very least, you're going to be paying for that. If you don't like the funeral home that you have selected, because you selected it very quickly, then you're going to have to move the person, and that's going to cost you more. So I would really like you to kind of do this once rather than move people around. And the cost is going to be anywhere on the low end. I've seen as low as $175 for this service to as high as 650. Same service, same van, often the very same subcontractors. It just depends on the company that you're using. All right. This is an inherent contract. You do not need to use the funeral home that you have discharged your person to if something happens, or if later you find out that they had a pre-need arrangement somewhere else or something like that, but you will be on the hook for that cost. Okay. And then finally, can you do it yourself? This was the only place, Connie, that I was going to mention the expected death in the home form. Sometimes people really want to have more engagement with their people, with their dead. And until really the last 150 years, we did all of this ourselves without mediators like me, without funeral directors. And you can do all of this yourself. But you do need to have a specific type of vehicle. Can't be like an open bed pickup truck. But interestingly, it can be a minivan. And as long as you can black out the windows, as long as people cannot see in, um, and and as long as you have the permit in place, which can be gotten very really relatively easily from Consumer Protection British Columbia, this is absolutely manageable to do yourself. This makes a lot of sense, especially for people who are wanting to have home vigils and home funerals, and then take their person directly to either the crematorium or the place of burial. Typically, though, that phone call is going to be made to a funeral home. The funeral home will dispatch once the body has been released from the hospital, or if the death occurred somewhere else, as soon as you authorize that transfer to take place. Okay?
I'm
That's,
gonna I'm gonna
yeah,
plug you for just a minute on
please,
this,
Doug, go ahead.
Krista, is that one of the really important places where end of life or death doulas can come in is when you want to do a lot of this yourself. And so reach out to Crystal or to
Krista?
Krista, and
So
you know that
I'm gonna hire a
there are a few
Mhm.
places that you can find an experienced death doula in your neighborhood.
hire the pros.
And and I will say too that there are very few funeral directors who are, sorry, death doulas who are also funeral directors, and I'm one of them. I think there's literally about 12 in all of North America, and there is enormous value in that, because there are certain things legally that I can do in terms of tending a dead person's body or assisting you in tending a dead person's body, and certain things that I know about the law, etc., and transportation, and helping you with permits and things that somebody who is not a licensed funeral director may not legally be able to do. Big fan, funeral directors, doulas, when they're all in one. Woohoo! All right. So now we're going to move on to arranging disposition. This is the next thing that you have to do after a death has occurred. This is when people get on the phone with me at the funeral home and say, "What do I do now?" They've now contacted the funeral home, sometimes for the first time, sometimes it's the second time after they've called for the transfer. In BC, we only have two legal options. One is flame-based cremation, and the other is burial. Right? Those are the only two options that we have in all of British Columbia. There are many other options in other parts of the world, but here we've just got those two options. I cannot just put you in a box and burn you. And anybody in this call or in your friend group or anything who says stuff like, just put me out by the dumpster or just put me in a box and burn me, just tell them Krista's going to slap you if she hears you say that. So don't say that, okay? Because first of all, there's simple legal realities here. Caring for a dead human body is actually an act of extreme reverence. And I think we all want it that way. I think that we start to become extremely disconnected from our own humanity when we minimize the act of after death care. And language like that really is quite minimizing. I totally get that you might want some economical choices readily available to you, but please, remember that this is a really an act of reverence and a final act that we will all experience. And if you can say that about yourself, now imagine saying it about someone you love. And that might make you understand why I get a little antsy around that kind of language about disposition.
I think that a lot of people will say it out of a sense of, letting taking some of the weight off. So pre-death, my dad, if anybody else has joined my other sessions, is I use my dad's example a lot. He would say, when I get like that, just shoot me or put a pillow over my head. And he would also say, just put me in a box and burn me. That was a way to lighten the mood, so to speak. But I took it pretty seriously. I took his, I would love to help you with that, Dad, but I can't. Um, and but there are some pretty big rules. I mean, there's some pretty big laws around around the disposition of body and being irreverent to it. And that's been around a long time. And I think it's one of the reasons because we do take that reverence very seriously.
People in healthcare will care for you um, eh, as their job and as their vocation. And people in death care will care for you as their job and as their vocation. And I think that there is a lot of overlap there. And while I know that many of us think that that might be like Connie, your dad, oh, just shoot me, just take me out back. How many times do I hear that? Yes, and we both know that the more meaningful conversation is what does that mean to you? How can I help understand your wishes and values so that your beliefs and values so that when the time comes, I can honor your medical wishes and I can make decisions on your behalf that will align with your values, right? And that's the work that folks like us do in the planning and in the medical planning and in the end of life planning space. You'll note here that mushroom suits and tree pods are an absolute hoax. I don't know if you've ever seen that TEDx, but there are people who want to sell you stuff when you're dead and you just don't need it. So this is another reason that I want you to know a funeral director before you need to know a funeral director because um, there are some pretty clever folks who have figured out that a lot of people are going to die. In fact, 100% of us are going to die. And there are folks who have tried to come up with new things to sell you at the end of your life. And mushroom suits was this ridiculous idea that you could put someone in this special bag with mycelium spores or whatever and bury you, and it would somehow make you decompose faster. We are fine. Our bodies are fine to be buried. We do not need that. And it was like $10,000 for this bag. Like, you don't need it. Okay. And then tree pods, everybody's Aunt Linda at some point has sent a picture of this on Facebook. It's the beautiful image of the tree that's coming up. And then underneath, there's kind of like an egg with a human figure on the inside. If you haven't seen it, just go Google tree pods.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Right? Absolute nonsense. And like, let's just think about this for a moment. How would we even get grandma in to that pod? And then how would we transport her in the hearse? And then how would we put her in the like it is utterly ridiculous. The one thing that's good about it, I could see Roderick just having a good chuckle there. The one thing that is good about both of these ridiculous hoax-like products is that it did actually spark conversation about what people might want. And in both of those cases, what that really illuminated was that many people do think that a greener end of life option is something that they might want to, after death option is something that they might want to explore. So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And then lastly, sometimes people think, A couple of things. Either I want to donate my body to science, or I want to donate my organs for organ transplant. And sometimes with the whole body scientific donation, sometimes people think, well, that's great because I'm going to get a free funeral. And actually, the reality is yes, your disposition will be taken care of. The costs associated with even now transport, that's just a new thing since COVID, but even transporting your body to the UBC entity that does this work, yeah, that is all covered. But the thing is you have to die in a very you have to die usually sort of in a specific way. You cannot, even if your body has been accepted while you're alive, once you die, they might reject you. I think of this as the ultimate form of rejection, frankly. And the reality is that if you have, if you're very old, or if you've wasted due to a disease at the end of your life, or if you've become really, you've just enjoyed life so much and you've become really quite heavy, if you're, you can in fact be too young, you can be too old, you could get hit by a bus. There are so many reasons that your body may not be accepted, and so you need to have a plan B when it comes to arranging disposition if your first choice is scientific body donation. If you would like to donate your body, if you would like to donate things like your corneas or your skin or any of your long bones or your organs, then you're going to have to die in a specific way and in a specific place for that harvesting to take place. And so while it's very important to make your wishes known, and you can absolutely still do that and have a very traditional funeral, even with a viewing and whatnot. You may not, again, be eligible. These donations either may not be required, or you may have died in a way that prevents that from taking place. So just really important stuff to think about, whether you'd like to do it or not. But remember, it may not actually be feasible for you. So arranging disposition is something that's going to take you a couple of hours. You're going to go into a funeral home more and more, especially since COVID. People are doing these online or over the phone, or even meeting in Tim Hortons, to tell the honest to goodness truth. And it is a legal contractual exchange that takes place. And what I'm going to recommend again is that you take your time. Unless there are religious reasons, religious or cultural or social cultural reasons for you to have a body in the ground or be cremated within a set amount of time, then please do yourself the kindness of taking time so that your head is a little bit clearer. I often met people in the funeral home who would come right from the hospital because they were like in an altered state, and they would come, then they'd be like, I really need to arrange this right now. My uncle is just and you know what? Ask them 72 hours later what decisions they've made. They can't tell you. This is a natural response to grief. So better yet, take your time and don't make that appointment for a day or two, or maybe even longer. Okay.
So I'm going to get you to pause there for a second.
Thank you.
I'm going to
Okay. I'll just share my last slide here. Share. The absolutely everything else, very small category here. But this this is the reason that that picture that I've chosen here is intentional. This is roughly a representation. The number of stars in that picture is roughly how many decisions you're going to have to make immediately after a death has occurred. And most of us think the decisions are what I talked about just a second ago on the previous slide: cremation or burial. That's what most people think of. That's one choice that you have to make. And sometimes, frankly, even that can be difficult. I once served a young man, very young, 20 something years old, lost his mother in a truly tragic and unexpected way. And we met for 5 hours. And during that time, he could not decide between cremation or burial. And then that had a lot to do with the grief and the unexpected nature of the death, etc. But it also seemed like an enormously big decision. It is an enormously big decision. And he felt ill-equipped to make it. And I, as a licensed funeral director, I am legally bound. I can't lead you to an answer. I can present options and I can give you pricing and I can help you understand the choices, but it would be wildly unethical for me to lead you to an answer. So the practical matters that need to take place, the questions that are going to be asked when a death occurs, expected or not, are sometimes going to take you by surprise. It's going to be things like the basics. Do you have a will? Does your dead person have a will? And don't even get me started on how complex things can get if the answer to that question is no. But what is your mother's maiden name? What is the dead person's mother's maiden name? And where was the dead person's mother born? Where was the dead person's father born? Now, we can, in fact, register a death without that information, but that information will be asked as part of the death registration process. And that can sometimes surprise people. And it can kind of kick them out, those practicalities, if they are not prepared for them. And if they don't have this information easily at their fingertips, social insurance numbers, passport numbers, credit card information, banking information, information about next of kin, these practicalities, if we don't have this information easily accessible, it can kind of kick us out of our grief, or it can be made so much more difficult to collect this information because of the fact that we are, as you see here, dealing with some pretty big emotions typically when a death has occurred. Again, even an expected death. But when you add unexpected, or you add traumatic, or you add tragedy, or you add out of order, or any of these things, the level of difficulty in processing what needs to happen and in what order just shoots through the roof. And finally, I just want to talk for a moment, and I don't need the screen on to do that, but well, actually, here, I'll put this screen on so that you can see that. I want to talk for a second about the importance of ceremony. As we have seen a rise in cremation as a disposition choice. Here in British Columbia, it's expected in just a few short years to be over 90%, in fact, inching up to 95% in just a few short years. And as we've seen that rise, we've seen a corresponding decline in what we would consider traditional funerals. Now, I am not, and this might surprise you as a funeral director, I am not an advocate for traditional funerals, but I am a fierce advocate for ceremony. Ceremony, whatever we call it. I love the word funeral, so I'm just going to use the word funeral. Whatever we call a funeral, a celebration of life, a memorial service, a gathering at the golf club, whatever we call that, we are going to be coming together in community, and we are going to be leaning on each other and gaining strength, sharing stories, and starting to make sense of a death that has created a loss in our life. And we will start to make sense of our new lives without our person in it. And that's why ceremony is important. I think that funeral homes, traditional funeral homes, and traditional funeral directors, as you can tell, I'm not wearing my jean jacket today, but you could probably already got the hint that I am not one of those ill-fitting suit, kind of shiny casket salespeople funeral directors. Funeral directors have done it to themselves. They did not meet people where they are at, and they tried to impose ceremony instead of making ceremony be being reflective. They made it prescriptive instead of reflective, and people fell away from it. There's also been a big, census-wise, we know that a lot fewer people identify as belonging to traditional religions, etc. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but funeral directors didn't help in any of this. And what I will tell you is that ceremony does help. And pre-planning and pre-thinking about all of this stuff can be an enormous gift to the people who are there near you. My dad died in March. We knew for decades what the plan was for dad, and we were able to enact it. And he had even taken the steps of taking care of some of the basics for us. So he actually prepaid for his cremation, and he actually kind of took care of that piece. The ceremony, we knew what he needed and wanted, and so we were able to manage that easily and simply. And it was so incredibly meaningful for us. And we had the gift of, frankly, not having to write a check for a few $1,000s for his simple cremation that he wanted. So can't say enough about that. It is not selfish to think these thoughts, to outline your wishes, to share these important conversations well beyond putting in your will, which, by the way, is a stupid place to put your disposition wishes. Well beyond putting in your will, I want to be cremated. That is one choice of the constellation of choices that I showed you that you're going to have to make. And so just do them, think them through, share them, so that when people are in that state of what do I do now? The question is not what do I do now? The question is, please help me. That's the question, not tell me what to do. I'm just going to leave you with this for 1 second. Please, this is me. My website is deathsapprentice.ca. My Instagram is deathsapprentice.ca. You can email me. I'm very responsive. hello@deathsapprentice.ca. I would love to continue our conversation in my community, in your communities. If you'd ever like to have a hip young funeral young who am I kidding? Hip new funeral director in your space, you just let me know. And Connie, back to you.
There, I have a lot of personal views about ceremony, and so there's a couple things that I wanted to share. Um, I ask people make their not make their loved ones promise something about promise me that you won't cremate me, promise me that you won't put me in the ground, promise me that you won't have a funeral for me or a ceremony for me. Um, I really feel like when you are actively dying and your choices around that, that is all about you. 150% about you. It's not what your wife wants. It's not what your husband wants. It's not what your kids want. What do you want to see for the end of your life? But I feel that once you have died, it is all about the family. It is all
Or the
about
people. Yeah.
it's all about the people. And I have personally been involved in so many people's end of lives, and I don't get invited to a ceremony
Mhm.
because we're just going to have close family and friends. There are a lot of people who need to grieve who are outside that circle. So I strongly believe in ceremony. I think it's incredibly healing. It gets rid of magical thinking that
Yeah.
somebody's going to just pop out of through a doorway and they didn't really die, even if that's just a little niggle in your head. I don't know. It really helps cement the thought and get the grieving going. Um, and then back to me as a former nurse and now as a healthcare navigator is to that death can be sudden. Death can come without warning. And to, take Christa at her word, go and get this planning done. I picked my funeral home and I haven't finished paying for it, but I am going to be shipped across the border to Washington State and I'm going to be composted. It's terramation. That's what I want to do. And so I've made those decisions now, and I expect to be around another 20 or so years at least. So plan ahead. That's
But
all
man,
I have to say.
my mother in 1995, my mother lost her mother, my grandmother, and um, her mother arranged for everything to do with her burial, which actually took place in Winnipeg. And so we did a ship out back to Winnipeg and we had the service and everything. My grandmother had paid for all of this. She had being Catholic, it was kind of easy because, you just have to press play on a Catholic mass. Like there's not a lot of like decisions around anything really. Like it sort of just goes in a certain way. But she knew exactly where it was going to take place and what was going to happen, and it was all paid for, and we all flew back to Winnipeg and whatnot. My mother was so moved by that. I think my mom was about 65 then. My grandmother was 95, and my mom came home at 65 and prearranged her funeral. My mom, being the cheapest woman in the world, went to some like ultra low, cost provider, blah, blah, blah. This woman paid like 4 pennies for what is known as a memorial service. This thing that she bought back in 1995, and my mom, by the way, is still alive, would now be worth about $18,000, $20,000. And we're not going to have to pay a penny of this. And we are going to be able to just press play on my mother's wishes when the time comes, because she she recognized the gift that she had been given and she decided to give it to us. I'm a big fan of also paying for it in advance, but I will tell you that even if you don't want to take that step, the work around making decisions around, would I allow my body to be seen again? Would I allow a visitation? Would I allow a viewing? Would I allow a service? What kind of service? Where do I have any thoughts around whether I want champagne served or Ritz crackers served or both? All of this, none of that is selfish. What is selfish is saying, promise me you won't. It's actually selfish and damaging to your survivors, hugely damaging. I have sat with full grown 60-plus-year-old big men in my arrangement room, men, full grown, gray haired adult men, white guys who had it their way, all of their lives, principals and bankers and stuff, like sobbing in my arms because their mother said, I don't want any service. Don't, don't have a funeral for me. That is actually kind of cruel. And it's fine, if you're a private person, fine. But remember, who cares? You're not going to care. You'll be dead. The simple fact is, people around you may care. And the way around that is to say, listen, this isn't very important to me. So please don't feel any need to, don't feel compelled, don't feel pushed. Certainly don't stress yourself. That's all okay to say. And if it matters to you, do what will help you heal.
Thank you. So before we go, I'm going to invite Krista to put her details into the chat. Krista, I want to point out, does not have a rock and mortar funeral home, right, Krista? You are
Yeah,
not.
I hang my license at Koru, which is down in Vancouver here. It is a very small woman-owned, all-in-one funeral home that has its own morgue on site. It is not a traditional funeral home in that we don't have a great big like ugly beige chapel and stuff like that. That is where I hang my license. I am a community funeral director, so I am out in the community. If you go to Koru, you won't find me there, but I do deal with all of their pre-need and pre-arrangement, or not all, but I do deal with their pre-need and pre-arrangement. And if you know and love me and I know and love you, and you want to have your services dealt with through Koru, and you've asked for me to be in attendance, I will absolutely be in attendance for you, no problem. That's my email. Here's my website. Uh,
While she's putting that in, I put in my links to my articles. I have 6 or 7 articles that are devoted to end of life choice and planning. And I put the one in about understanding body donation and organ donation. They're two completely separate processes. And so I just want you to be able to see that. And then before we end the recording, I want to tell you about something really, really important that Christa and I are doing together. We both have heard a lot of people say that when they get to the end of their lives and they've got dementia, that they want medical assistance in dying. And there's so much misinformation, so much disinformation, and so much fear around those kinds of decisions. And so Christa pulled all of her strings, and we have the wonderful, incredible top doctor about medical assistance in dying. Dr. Stephanie Green is joining us on November the 21st, Thursday, November 21st at 7 p.m. And yeah, uh, thank you. And so it won't be this form of workshop, it will be a webinar. And we hope that you will bring as many people as you possibly can. It's $25 per ticket. And we just really, really hope that we can fill up
That room.
beyond capacity our this, because it's, to me, the most important conversation that needs to take place right now. And I'm going to put that into the chat as well.